Blog Talk Radio. Hello and welcome to Awakenings. That was a bit of Elements of Grace by artist, musician, and channeler, author Diane Garris. I'm your host, Michele Meiche, and welcome to a wonderful day, a new beginning. We are new. Today is the day. Today is the day to do what it is that you have been being nudged or called to do. Awakenings is a place that hosts dialogues and interviews with spiritual teachers, healers, conscious experts, visionaries, awakened leaders and authors, conscious beings of all walks of life that are awakening or awake and integrating this awakened state into their everyday lives. Awakenings is a place that reflects the bridging point between science and spirituality. Awakenings is a place of guidance to support and guide you through the shifts and changes of these universal awakenings. Awakenings is a connecting point in the converging flow. Hi all in the chat. It's so great to see you in the sacred space of empowerment. Blessings to all, and mystic in light, I see you all, and even more importantly, I feel your resonance, the beings that you are living authentically and connected to your true nature. I feel your service, and I'm so tickled and appreciative to be able to connect in and be with all of you here through Blog Talk Radio, Cosmic Dimensions, as well as all the podcast stations, all the reference points and iTunes. These connecting points really are references. They're reference points for us to refer to and be referred to connect in with each other all along the way, almost like when you're going, on a hike, a late night hike, or up somebody's house that has a really long driveway, a roadway, and they've got those little markers. Every so often there's a light, and there's a light. And that's what it means to be the way shower. Someone asked me the other day, can you take a class to be a way shower? How do you become a way shower? Well, you become a way shower by doing your own inner work, doing your own work and being on a path and growing and evolving. And when I'm saying growing and evolving, I mean just waking up more and more to the truth of who you are, and like a penny or something, or a stone, cleaning off little rough edges, or just releasing what isn't really perhaps you or serving you or authentically you, or perhaps what's not needed or necessary anymore. It doesn't have to be a big deal. But we become, first of all, it's encoded within your DNA and your energetic matrix if you are a starseed light being or a way shower. I got news, most everyone is, but everybody's gifts are a little bit different, how they're manifesting. But to be that way shower, to have that consciousness, to be consciously showing the way, consciously be the lamp of light, the light bearer, the light worker, means that you've embarked upon the path with that first and foremost in mind. Way showers or light workers don't get on the path characteristically to now I'm going to go out and put my shingle out or I'm going to help people. The helping comes out of the healing, the true healing, where one says, wow, I have these gifts, I want to help others so that they can experience what I've experienced or they can avoid the pitfalls. I had amazing, maybe she's listening today or people that know her, I had a student of mine, and this is a great example of a way shower, who actually has taken a few of my classes at Agape, and the meditation. I'm not sure if she took the universal laws or not, or manifesting your life's destiny and living your soul's purpose, but definitely I know the meditation, and more than one time, and took a lot of classes there, and very much on a path and awakening and opening, and now has a center. But see, that's the way shower. That is a true way shower. So out of this extension of this individual's own unfolding, their own spiritual integration, prepared. See, we talk about it metaphysically a lot with the preparation. When we have the custodial keepers of the Lucis Trust of the Alice Bailey books, as well as Risa has been on, Robert Wilkinson, and others, they all talk about the preparation, that you have to do your inner work. You have to do, your work. Because we're part of it too. Even if the gifts are coming through us, as us, we're still in the process. And that process of becoming and allowing what is emerging to come through more and more unobstructedly. Wonderful Mystic and Light, yes, please throw in your 2 cents wherever you can, and maybe 4 or 5 cents, that's good too. Call in, share, or in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable. But anyway, so back to that. So it's really, it comes, the gift or the wanting to assist, to show the way, comes first and foremost by example, and then it comes by, wow, a lot of, there's this example there, where can I share my gifts, my talents? But it really comes out of the being, first and foremost, having been on a path of consciousness. And even if coming in with the consciousness awareness or the gifts, there still is the inner work. There still is the Sangha or satsang, if we want to use some, traditional Sanskrit meanings. If we want to use another term, meeting at church, meeting at the mosque, meeting at the temple, below maybe the pub, I don't know, wherever. But the gathering of the like-minded individuals to refresh, renew, to share experiences, to express the happenings, and also basically to get the 411 that's going on. Debbie is asking, Little Light is asking what about your inner work. Your own inner, it's going to take different, it's the looking within and noticing if there's any blocks or anything that's stopping you from being truly you. For some, maybe some part of it is traditional therapy, NLP, hypnotherapy, alpha theta clearing. You need to release. Bob Doyle, we talked about it, a couple Fridays ago. Everyone's mentioning it, which I'm loving, because a lot of times people just think, well, I'm psychic or I have these gifts. Remember, it's not what we do that connotes or denotes our consciousness. It's the intent, the motivation. It's where we're at on the inner posture. Just like in yoga, it's not how far you stretch. It's what's your inner posture. What is your inner posture, your inner world like? Because that's what communicates to the outer world. That's where the vibrational frequency comes in. So someone can have a lot of things or read a lot of books or be on the bestseller list or look, quote unquote, spiritual. They're spiritual looking stereotypes, or have it all together, or look natural, or whatever it is, whatever the stereotypic generalization is. Someone can look a certain way, but we're really not interested in the looks. We're interested in the consciousness. What is the inner plane? What is the inner being like? Not to say that we don't lose it or have issues or problems or challenges. It's not about that. It's about the chronic states. Are we living in these stuck states of emotion, or are we like a fine violin, a Stradivarius, where those strings are very fluid, or a cello or a guitar or, a drum. You don't want the rust. And so, little lights, reaching a pure point within, free of baggage. Yeah, or if there's that, we always have a little baggage. Think of when you guys travel, and whenever we travel, sometimes we take a little too much with us. It's not being identified with your emotional states of being, and at the same time getting free of or releasing, through releasing work or clearing work, releasing patterns, whether they're behavior patterns, energetic patterns, emotional patterns, belief system patterns that don't allow us to fully actualize ourselves. So it's not enough anymore to realize. Self-realization is wonderful, but if you don't do something with what you realize, in other words, actualize it in the world, then you're not living to your full capacity. So it's moving into a space with, no matter what's going on, you're living more and more from that center of divine will, love, light, and intelligence, of joy, of peace and calm. Even when anxiety is happening or there's situations around you, you're able to notice, wow, that's a human emotion. Okay, I'm feeling that. Get the support and look beyond the external circumstances. And that's getting more and more important as we're in the corridor of the new age, as we get really into that anteroom, into the big room of it, the big, ballroom that we're all going in. That's going to be, and is right now, very important that people are not allowing themselves to be held back. And you have the tools of meditation, living in that meditative state to tune in and see what's right for me. What's my soul's directive? What's my soul wanting to come through? What's the spiritual impulse? Where am I being spiritually guided, spiritually directed? And we know that by our intuiting, right, or our intuition. So on that level, it really is about being able to access these more expanded or transcendent states. One thing that's happening right now, there is such a movement to find ways to connect into these transcendent or transpersonal states that are states of being. It is us. It's connecting into that subtle energy and looking beyond the appearances. And we have a wonderful bridging, if you will, say, of the right brain and the left brain axis working together more. This is the conjunctio, or the cosmic union of the male aspect of extending out, being more electrical, separating out, individuating out, with the feminine of that collective or merging or coming together. Or you can also say science and spirituality. There is a bridging point that is happening. It's been happening for quite a while, but you're seeing, you're welcome, Little Light, no problem for that explanation. You're seeing this bridging point being more and more apparent, more and more overt, so that there will be more tolerance. In other words, maybe the languaging may be different. The idea of a causal point, or the observer point, that once I'm observing something, I'm separate from it. But when I am in that state of awareness that I am no longer observing, I'm with that, or being that, or there is no more that. There just is the isness in the moment. So we can look at that perhaps from a spiritual point of view, or metaphysical point of view, or a quantum mechanics point of view, or a scientific point of view. They're all points of view, but you're finding we're beginning to understand that many of us are speaking the same language but different words. And that's a lot of what this converging point is about, that we're coming from all areas, all walks of life, all disciplines, all understanding, but we're converging in the center, in that space and place of oneness, to now share our gifts, our talents, our ideas in a world of co-creation, cohabitation. cooperation, communication, because there's becoming more and more of a recognition. There's a movement that's happening, that we're being emerging. The impulse that's moving through us is saying we are in this universe, this one song that also has many verses to it. That is that converging flow. And so we have people come on the show, obviously, with many different disciplines and points of view and life wisdom. It's so important that we all share our understanding and our story, our awareness, because it absolutely helps each other, assists each other, gives us support, and it's very interesting and it's very fun. We want to do things more from the joy point. Remember that it's really about moving into that play of consciousness or spirit of play. We have today an amazing guest that I'm very, very tickled to be connecting with and hearing more of this individual's wisdom and awareness. And some of you may already know of him, very prolific writer, speaker, just all-around being. Has a few books out, and we'll get into that a little bit. But today we're going to be speaking with, converging with, and dialoguing with anthropologist Hank Wesselman, and who is actually one of those individuals we've been speaking of that is bridging that scientific, perhaps, point of view and the mystical, bridging that spiritual and the scientific together. He's the author of Spirit Walker, Medicine Makers, Spirit Medicine, Vision Seekers, as well as some others. And I'd like to welcome Hank. Hello, Hank.
Hey, Michelle. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Is the sound coming through well?
Yeah. Is there a way to bump up the volume just a little bit?
Well, I can speak more directly into the phone. How's that?
That's better, yes. And then they'll let, yes.
Yeah, I'm on the west side of the island of Hawaii, so we've got a 14,000-foot volcano between you and I. But we seem to be doing okay.
Yes. I just was speaking to some wonderful friends and wonderful collegial healers, I guess if we want to call it, last night from Maui. So, yeah, you guys have been having some amazing weather.
We are. And, you know, for your listeners, you know, I just might announce in advance that I live in rural agricultural Hawaii. And so if you suddenly hear roosters break in, it's because there are chickens all around.
Oh, I love it, Hank. I love it.
Yeah, I don't live in a town.
Okay, wow, yeah.
Well, listen, I caught some of your talk. You're covering some very interesting territory this morning.
Ooh, okay. Shall we dive in?
Sure.
One thing, and I'm go ahead, yes.
You know, one of the things that you brought up is a very important one. There's a kind of quickening which is going on right now in which everything is speeding up. And I think that this has to do with the fact that we are coming to the end of a long cycle of ages. And, of course, as you know, many of the indigenous people have talked about this and people have written about it. And, you know, as we come to the end of this cycle, things seem to be unraveling. And if you take a look at the culture at large and the world at large, that certainly seems to be going on. And this is very much on track. You know, this is what happens at the end of major cycles. It's the same thing that happened, for example, at the end of the last cycle with the collapse of the Roman Empire and the beginning of the next cycle, which is the one we're coming to the end of right now. So, you know, everything seems to be speeding up, and consciousness among people at large is also emerging in a new and more aware form. I think that's a good way to put it. And this is sort of where you were going with your talk when I started to listen in.
Yes, the quickening phase and the emergence. It seems that they're really moving out of that idea of everything being a learning lesson or, you know, having to do this or that, moving in more into that creative point where we're living more inspired. For some, it's like living on a wing and a prayer because there is so much change. There is so much influx and so much change. Do you find, Hank, it's really, what do you feel the call is there? What are we being called to do you feel?
Well, I think we're being called to step up. I think we're being called to step up to the plate and step up to the next level and create the next cycle of ages based on a more evolved level of conscious awareness, in everything that we do, in our relationships, in our businesses, in our lifestyles, in our choices in life. I think all of this is in the process of shifting considerably. And of course, people don't like change all that much. They like to hang on to what was. They like to hang on to the known. So change is always scary. I mean, you can, without, sort of irritating the Republicans in the listening audience, you could see how threatened the conservatives in the Senate and the Congress were with Barack Obama's plan. With the fact that he didn't get a single Republican, for one level of that. I mean, it just was such a statement of the fact that we cannot continue to do business as usual, because if we do, we're going to miss that chance. We're going to miss that opportunity to step up and rebuild this world, on a new foundation for the next cycle. And I think this is really what the whole thing about 2012 is all about. I know that many of your listeners have read a great deal about this, because all sorts of charismatic New Age speakers with PowerPoint presentations have been talking about 2012, and various books and novels have come out and so forth and so on. But the fact is that we're coming to the end of a cycle, and the next cycle is going to be determined largely by the choices that we make now. And so it's very important for us to not be threatened, to not step back into the past, to not retreat, so to speak, but to be, really open ourselves to the possibilities that are available to us. And I think these are absolutely enormous.
Yes. And now it's interesting, Hank, that you mentioned retreat, because I am seeing there seems to be a, and you're obviously, you have a scientific background as an anthropologist, but also you are a shaman, so you're obviously connected with inner plane work. This density, the subtle energy getting, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say more visceral, or the viscosity to it, heavier. There seems to be right now, and I didn't so much feel it before, there's this movement of wanting to move forward, or, like you say, step up to move into this. And then there seems to be this other movement of holding pattern or retreat. And like you just said, it's not the time to retreat. Have you tapped into any of that feeling?
Well, this is what the Native Americans did in the 1890s. They retreated into archaic tradition to try to revitalize their culture. This is what anthropologists call a cultural revitalization movement. And the ghost dance of the 1890s was a classic example of this, where they were using a particular kind of dance to alter consciousness. It was a kind of people's divinatory shamanism, if I could put it that way. There wasn't just one shaman or two shamans operating. It was a way for the whole community to operate. And they were stepping back through time to connect with the ancestors. Because by the late 1890s, about 95% of the Native American people of North America had been killed. They'd been massacred. That was their Holocaust. And so they'd lost their prayers, they'd lost their ceremonies, they'd lost their sacred knowledge. They just didn't know it anymore because all the elders were gone. And so the ghost dance was an attempt to step backwards into an archaic tradition, to go back to what was in order to revitalize the present. And of course, there was no way of getting out of it. They were going to have to change. They were going to have to step up because they'd been steamrollered by a dominant culture, Western people who had invaded North America and just taken over. So, today, we're faced with a similar problem. Are we going to step backwards into archaic tradition? This is, in a way, what fundamentalism is all about. The fundamental perspective, and I hope I'm not irritating anybody who's listening.
No.
As an anthropologist, I have a certain perspective on things which people seem to find interesting. Fundamentalism is really a perspective that comes down to us from the Dark Ages. And it's been embraced by misguided religious zealots who now have the power, the monetary power, and the weaponry to ensure that this world is going to be their God's world or nothing. And they believe in this authoritarian sky god who lives in heaven, who has good days and bad days, who's very unpredictable. My God is a jealous God, all of that stuff. That's straight out of the Middle Ages. That's an archaic worldview. And that worldview is no longer relevant to who we've become in our own time. That worldview is really opposed to the new view of the secular humanists who perceive an omnipresent, user-friendly, benevolent force, life force or creative force that exists within everything, everywhere, who is focused on the positive polarity. This isn't a guy who sits up in heaven. This is, that universal directive that you were talking about, which has come in from the cosmos, which we ourselves embody, which our star embodies, which our planet embodies, which everything from the mosses and liverworts to the redwoods embody. We all have it. And it's a new perception of God, and it's a new perception of the goddess as well. I've been talking on email with a guy named Emmanuel Etier, who's coming out with a film called The Invocation, which is about God and the new perception of God. And he's going to come out with another film about the goddess. And so he's asked Jill and I if he could interview us at Esalen when we're there in April teaching a workshop. And this should be very interesting because I'm not really interested in the old archaic questions about how do you define yourself as a woman. What I'm more interested in is, how you perceive yourself as one half of a whole, because, there's no way really to exclude the men, is there? I mean, the masculine and feminine are the two halves of the force of creation.
Yes, and it's the magnetic and the electrical. I think a lot of people forget that. You need both to spawn creation or have that emergence. You have to have, we're comprised of both.
Yes, the two make a whole. They make an entirety. And so when you take the holistic understanding of how everything comes together and how everything works, I think it helps to reduce a lot of the polarity, both the positive and negative polarity, which seems to infuse and in a way infect the way in which people perceive themselves vis-a-vis the rest of the world.
Now, Hank, do you feel, you speak of the polarity, that in this new yuga, this new stage that we're moving through and co-creating actually and birthing through, as you said, stepping through and having to step up to, that we're moving beyond that swing of the polarity, that overemphasis of the polarity, or maybe moving more into the holistic approach?
Well, my first book was called Spirit Walker. And when that book came out, I kind of braced myself because I'm a very mainstream scientist. And those of your listeners who've read Spirit Walker know that this is the last kind of book that a mainstream scientist would write. It's really the study of my initiation into the shamanic worlds of mystery and meaning. And it began in Africa while I was on expedition. But that book, once it was published, had far-reaching effects. And one of the effects was to bring Jill and I into connection with a Hawaiian elder named Makua, Hale Makua. And he was very, he was kind of very standoffish at the beginning because he was a fully initiated kahuna. He was not one of these guys who did workshops. He didn't talk on the phone. He didn't have a website. The last thing he wanted was to see his name or his photograph in print. This guy was the real thing. And we became great friends over the last 8 years of his life. One of the main things he talked about was the fact that the time has come for us to determine where our anchor rests. And for most of us, the anchor rests in the negative polarity. Now, we may think that it doesn't. We may think that we're good people, that we go to church on Sunday, we go to the mosque on Friday, we go to the synagogue on Saturday, we may pray very hard to God, et cetera, and be, focused on the positive. But if we make our living at the expense of somebody else's failure, if we, injure people with our words or our thoughts or our deeds, we're in the negative polarity. There's just no way to get around it. And the time has come to really lift anchor out of the negative and resync it in the positive and leave it there. And I think this is very, very important. Without going into a long-winded monologue, on our first big meeting that we had with this elder, and, I wish I could, show you an image of him. long ponytail down his back, big white beard down his front. He was in his late 50s at that time, big walking stick. He really looked the role. The first day we got to know each other, we were sitting right on the edge of an active volcano in Volcano National Park. This is the volcano Kilauea. And over a long afternoon, he and I very slowly revealed ourselves to each other with explanation. That's how men do it.
Yes.
And at the end of that afternoon, he reached in the back of his truck and he hauled out this gift, which was wrapped in the traditional way as a tea leaf bundle. That's called ho'okupu here in Hawaii. And he gave it to Jill and I, and we unwrapped it, and inside was this very plain wooden Hawaiian bowl. And he looked at us and he said, when each one of us comes into this world, we come in with a bowl of light, and that light nourishes us and sustains us as we pass through life. That's our light. He said, but whenever we step into the negative polarity, whenever we take something that doesn't belong to us, or we injure somebody with our words, our thoughts, our deeds, it's like you put a stone in your bowl and some of your light goes out. He said, now life is long, and slowly but surely your bowl of light begins to fill up with stones until there's virtually no light coming anymore. And as an aside, he looked at us and he said, the major problem in the world today is that the world is being run by men whose bowls of light are filled with stones. These are men without light. And this is the major problem. We have a crisis of leadership, which is causing all of our problems. He said, when we come to the realization of what we're doing, he said, you know what you do? Both
what?
Jill and I are hanging on every word.
Yeah, exactly.
What? And he took the bowl and he turned it over. And he said, you just dump it out. He cleared the bowl with a big laugh, He said, but once you've done that, you start to lead your life differently.
Yeah.
He said, it's at that point that you become a spiritual warrior. And he used the word warrior with deliberation because he'd been a military warrior for most of his life in the Marines. 5 wars. The last one was Vietnam. Anyway, he said, the spiritual warrior, and I'm talking to you, I'm talking to me, I'm talking to everybody listening out there, because all of your listenership, they wouldn't be listening in unless they were at this point.
Absolutely.
He said, as spiritual warriors, our path is a narrow one, and it's constrained by 3 sacred directives. Now, in Hawaii, we call these kapus, K-A-P-U, which is like the Tahitian word tabu. Now, a kapu is kind of like a restriction. It's kind of like a directive. It's kind of like like parentheses that guides you in a certain direction. He said there are 3 sacred kapus by which we must live our lives. He said, number 1, we must love all that we see with humility. Now, I'm sitting there digesting that first one, and I'm thinking, boy, easy one first.
Yeah.
And of course, this guy was very clairvoyant. So he's laughing because he's reading me like a book.
He's reading you like how you're responding.
Right. Yeah, so love all that you see with humility. And he smiled and said, I worked on that one for 7 years. The second is to live all that you feel with reverence. To live all that you feel with reverence. The third is to know all that you possess with discipline. To know all that you possess with discipline. And that includes what possesses you. Because, we cannot, as spiritual warriors, as spiritual practitioners on the path, we must find our self-discipline. This is where all the spiritual leaders and gurus stumble. They lack that self-discipline, which you simply must develop as a spiritual practitioner. So this is really our practice, to love all that we see with humility, to live all that we feel with reverence, a kind of active respect, and to know all that we possess with discipline. And all 3 of those kapus bring you into the positive polarity.
Yes.
You like it?
Yeah, I do. It reminds me, you say 7 years. I had that with one of my teachers that love all that you see with humility. Yeah, that one is, because when you think of all is all. That's everything and everyone.
For those of your listeners who are interested, there's a real short, like 2-3 page chapter about Makua with an image of him in our last book, Spirit Medicine, the one I co-authored with my wife, and those kapus are recorded there.
And that's in the book. I'm putting it in the chat. So, and also, I've been putting it in the chat, but those of you that are listening by phone or in the car or later are going to listen to the archive, to reach Hank Wesselman, you can go to sacredwisdom.com. And Hank, is there...
Shared.
Shared? Oh, shared. Okay, shared. Thank you. I'm glad you could. Okay,
sharedwisdom.com.
Okay. Actually, did have that.
Sharedwisdom.com.
Okay, and then the picture, is that on there, or that's in the book Spirit Medicine?
It's in the book Spirit Medicine. But if people go to the website, they can take a look at the books and things that we produce. And we have a newsletter to sign up for, and I send one out almost every month. And, it's really fun. It gives us a whole new level of interplanetary communication, which didn't exist 10 years ago.
No.
I mean,
and we're so needing this right now. We're so needing this.
Well, when you think about the change that's going on in the world, this degree of change, this degree of shift in our cultural values probably only happens once or twice in 1,000 years. And this particular shift is happening at a time when it's being enabled by a worldwide communication system and a high technology unlike anything that's ever been seen before. I find this deeply reassuring. I find this is where I find hope for the future.
Okay. Okay. Boy, Hank, you're getting some wonderful response on your voice as well as the information from people in the chat. I'm just going to pass that on to you. It's very calm and assuring and peaceful and great information that's really helping. So we thank you so much for being here. Now, can you, and we'll dive back in, but share a little bit with the listeners how you came upon this path. You were studied originally to be an anthropologist and were teaching.
Well, I still am. I mean, my first advanced degree was in zoology from the University of Colorado at Boulder back in the 60s, and my second was my PhD is in anthropology from UC Berkeley. And for the last 35, 36, 37 years, I've been working with the paleoanthropology crew in East Africa. I'm one of those guys who goes out into the Rift Valley on expedition with a group of specialists, geologists, archaeologists, paleontologists, looking for the fossil evidence for human evolution.
Wow.
That's what I do as a scientist.
Oh, my God. Okay. Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah, that's why it's a little unusual for me to write a book like Spirit Walker.
I know. Well, it's interesting. You don't get more earthed, right, Hank? You don't get more earthed or grounded than in paleontology, and working with that.
Well, what's interesting is that this book, Spirit Walker, which is an autobiographical book, there are actually 3 books in the trilogy: Spirit Walker, Medicine Maker, and Vision Seeker. The first book, Spirit Walker, is really about my shamanic initiation. It's about how in Africa I began to have these spontaneous visions in which I began to have these dreamlike experiences in the middle of the day when I was very much awake. And at night I would have these classic out-of-the-body experiences, and I had no idea what they were. I mean, I was not one of these worthies who had worshipped at the knees of the wisdom masters for 10 years, practicing meditation and yoga, hoping for transcendent experiences. I mean, this was last on my list. In those days, I worshipped solely at the altar of science. And so I began to have these experiences, and I didn't know what to do with them. So I knew I couldn't talk to my fellow scientists. So I talked to the African men who were working with me. Now, these were tribal men. Most of them were illiterate. Most of them could not write. Most of them could not read. Most of them didn't speak any English whatsoever. But there was always one or two who could, and so we would have these extraordinary discussions. I'd be in a tented safari camp for 3 months at a time out in the desert in southwestern Ethiopia. That's where this began. But, I wasn't ready at that point, Michele, so I kind of made cryptic notes in my field journal, which only I, of course, could decipher, because this isn't the sort of thing you share with your colleagues,
That's right.
And I went on with my life. Then, in 1983, I was still living in Berkeley with my wife, Jill, and she was pregnant with our first child. And one night, at 4 o'clock in the morning, I might add here, on the heels of a joyous marital encounter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I like
Jill
that.
used to wince
Yes.
when I said that.
I know.
But it was on the heels of a joyous marital encounter. I was precipitated into a mystical altered state of consciousness in which I had a direct transpersonal encounter with what tribal people would call a spirit. Now, shamanic initiation, now without sounding like I'm sounding off, shamanic initiation is by far and away, I think, the most arduous form of spiritual initiation. I mean, all the others are like a walk on the beach compared to shamanic initiation. And why would I say that? Because inevitably the first experience that the shaman has is a direct encounter with death.
Mm-hmm.
And the first chapter in Spirit Walker, although I didn't call it the Angel of Death, that first chapter in Spirit Walker is about how I was brought face to face with Joe Black. And he didn't look like Brad Pitt.
Okay, I was going to say.
Remember the film Meet Joe Black?
I do. That's what you said. Yeah, that's an easy one to take, right? That form.
Fabulous film. Fabulous film. I don't think the world was ready for it. It was an extraordinary film. In fact, I watched it with the Kahuna. Both of us watched it together. Anyway, I was brought face to face with death, and I was taken through the death experience in which I temporarily died, and in that state I was shown the existence of power beyond my wildest imagining. I was shown the life force. I was shown the power of the universe. And of course, I had no idea what I was being shown because, I didn't have the background for this. Well, I was put back in my body. My heart started to beat again. And, I came out of this experience profoundly shaken. And I knew that my world was never going to be the same again. Now, as an anthropologist, what anthropologists like to do is they like to do field work. It's one thing to read about other people's field experiences, but it's much more interesting to have them yourself. And so I knew about shamans. I knew, for example, that shamans, when we use the word shaman in the Western world, most of us tend to conjure up an image of a masked and costumed tribal person dancing around a fire in the dark, involved in some sort of mysterious ritual accompanied by drum beats. Well, now, inside that cultural shell of mask, costume, and ritual, there's an individual, a man or a woman, who has a very real set of skills. All shamans are individuals who have the ability to trance very easily. They have the ability to go into these altered states very, very easily. And when they're in those altered states, they learn how to read geography, their conscious awareness, if I could put it that way, how to read geography, their conscious awareness, into an alternate reality that all the traditional people know about. They call it the spirit world. It's the same world that we go into when we dream at night, although most people are unaware of that. And in this spiritual world, in this alternate dimension, they encounter personalities, transpersonal forces, archetypes, beings, the spirits of animals and plants, the spirits of nature, the spirits of ancestors, the higher organizing intelligences. Some people call them angels, and that's a fine thing to call them. But, when you have a direct encounter with them, you realize that they are not winged superhumans. There's nothing human about them, in fact. But they are nevertheless very, very real. And through relationship with these transpersonal forces, shamans are able to do various things, initially on behalf of themselves, and then increasingly on behalf of others. The shaman is, in a sense, a public servant who is at service to their community. And so shamans become master healers. Many of them become master healers. Many of them become guides of souls, where they guide the soul of the recently deceased to where it's supposed to go in the afterlife, after the death experience. Many of them become specialists in divination, accessing information from the other side. A lot of psychics fall into this category.
Yeah,
a lot of psychics and mystics. They also are able to restore power to those who've lost their power. In fact, that's the first level of shamanic healing. It's about empowerment. And so I was kind of drawn into this world, and I had no idea what I was getting into. I mean, I had no idea. I knew about shamans, And I began to have these ongoing spontaneous experiences, which is what Spirit Walker was all about. My ongoing spontaneous experiences in which I kind of wove parts of my own life together with these transpersonal experiences to try to figure it out, to try to figure out what was going on. And for me,
one thing, go ahead, Hank, and then I'll...
Well, for me, I'll just finish by saying it was very problematic because I began to have this ongoing continuum of connections with the mind of a man who lives in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's still an aspect of Hank Wesselman that steps back and, when I say that and said, God, Hank, did you really say that to these people? I mean, it sounds so incredibly flaky. But the fact is, I began to have this ongoing continuum of spontaneous visionary connections with the mind of a man who lives in the future. To be precise, he lives 5,000 years after the collapse of Western civilization. Now, that's what the Spirit Walker trilogy is about. This man, his name is Nine Noah. And if I've got this right, and I believe I do, and he believes I do as well, by the way, I'm his ancestor, and he's my descendant. There's an ancestor-descendant relationship between us, which is how the connection became possible. So,
yes.
those
well, that usually happens shamanically, though. There usually is that connection. Whether you're reconnecting to, a future self, right, or an ancestral self.
Well, in fact, I believe he is a future self.
Okay,
and Grand Central Station is our shared oversoul field. Our shared oversoul field, the immortal aspect of the soul, which does not die, which travels across time, sending in that seed of light at the beginning of life. The elder Makua, the kahuna, he used to say that what happens at the beginning of life is your oversoul, which in Hawaiian is called aumakua. The oversoul divides itself and sends in a seed of its life to take up residence in a new embodiment for a new life. And the vehicle of transfer, believe it or not, is the breath.
Yes,
when we take our first breath, when we emerge from our mother's body, and as newborns, we take that first breath, that seed of light is planted within us. And it's a direct line to the oversoul field, the spirit that hovers over us, always. This is really the God in heaven who listens to your prayers, works in mysterious ways, and sends occasional messengers to earth, ourselves, who usually get treated very badly. So the kahunas had a very interesting way of looking at the soul. But of course, I didn't know any of this when this started for me. But it drew me onto a completely different path. And my life has just been an incredible adventure ever since, I might add. I get to travel all over and teach at places like the Wesselman Institute in California, and Omega in New York, and the Crossings in Texas, and Brighton Bush in Oregon. And I teach these workshops, which are organized in such a way to draw in other mystics, people who've had spontaneous experiences, who are interested in what's going on with them. And with a minimum of training, I discover that they can find this inner doorway within themselves, open it, and journey into these transpersonal spiritual realms where they encounter these inner sources of wisdom and power that indigenous people call spirits. They're helping spirits and they're teaching spirits. And, of course, angelic spirits.
Which is part of this transpersonal, multidimensional, multi-simultaneous reality is where, many of us are living that, but it's a fringe. This will be more of a reality. So there needs to be a map. There needs to be more of a map to this.
Most of us are unaware of the fact that we're living on three different levels at the same time. And, when you start to pay attention and you start to become aware of it, life really becomes very enriched. You could say that a great many of us in our society are simply sleepwalking through our lives. We're totally distracted by the glitter of our gadgets and by television and by endless meaningless sporting events on television. And, most of us, are completely ensnared in these illusions so that we never find out who we are, what we're doing here, and what this whole thing is all about. But those of us who do, who sort of wake up to the fact that, this is only one level of reality and awareness and experience available to us, the life that we're living in the physical world right now. Once we come to that awareness, our experience of life expands considerably. I'm sure that all of your listeners out there know exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, and that was the birth of Awakenings, was with the oversouls that I work with, was to start this. Originally the show, it was on another station, pre-recorded, and I had to learn. I kept asking, you want me to do? You want me to do what? And I had to learn the recording equipment, and it was quite amazing. And as well as one of my teachers, Jana Chui Jesus, I've studied with her, initiated through her shamanically, and later found out, she told me that one of the people we had been studying with, or beings, I call it person, but beings, Ventana Quantro, Wana Four Winds, was actually me, but a future me. So I was studying on this plane with Jana Chui Jesus, and we were both studying with the interplane work with Kayandalis and Wana, and then later in my work, my journey with her, about a few years later, she told me that it was that I, on another dimension or level, my future self was Wana Ventana Quantro. So I was like, oh, we've been studying with me, but it's a future me. Okay, that was, and then she was, revealed to me. But I think, Hank, all of this is, we're having this conversation here. We're in this converging flow, coming together, so that people have places to go in their succession of awakenings. You have your books, the CDs, the CD set, which you have the teachings, and then places where you're meeting actually physically, where people can connect with you on this, because we don't have within our society the map. We don't have, like you said, you had at least some people to talk to. A lot of people don't. You were in that situation because of your other part of your path, your other work. But a lot of people are waking up and having these very experiences and are asking, what's happening to me first, and then where do I go? We already had someone in the chat, at least I'm not going crazy. So already what you're saying, someone is responding and saying, oh my God, at least I'm not going crazy.
Yeah, I mean, if I've got this right, and if you've got this right, and we believe we do, all right, I think we're hardwired. I think there's a genetic program on our DNA, and our DNA is kind of like our inner hard drive, okay, the hard drive of a computer. It's the operating system, plus it's the potential for everything that we can become in life. But like most computer programs, unless it's double-clicked, it just sits on your computer. I mean, you get a new computer, and who knows what this thing can do. What you really want is your emailer and your internet set up and so forth and so on. And then one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, you have this experience, and you get up and you open up your laptop, and wham, this new program comes up on your screen, and you think, Jesus, where the hell did this come from? And what is it? I mean, that's kind of like what happened to me. And for me, it was tantra. It was joyous marital encounters with my wife that tended to trigger this spontaneous program. And so I think that we all have it to a greater or lesser degree. Now, I say greater or lesser because in our typical workshop groups, I find that about 80% of the people in the workshop group can do this to some extent, and about half of us are really good at it. This is right in alignment with what anthropologists have found among the Kalahari Bushmen, for example. Everybody remembers that film, The Gods Must Be Crazy?
Yeah, I love that. I love that
people
movie.
with all of these in their language. Remember?
Yes, that's them? Okay.
These people are known for their shamans. And in a typical Bushman band, the way they used to be, about 50% of the group could shamanize when the need required it. And this is what I and people like Michael Harner and Sandra Ingerman and others have found in our workshops, that about 50% of the people that come in as beginners are really good at it, and then they tend to come back for more in-depth training. So you end up with these extraordinary groups of visionaries in which everybody is on the same page, and I'll take them into a certain place in the other world with a minimum of direction, with a minimum of lead-in, and then we'll do the journey accompanied by the drum as the physical stimulus to double-click the program. And then we'll come out and share what we've perceived. And it's amazing. I listen as these non-tribal Western people come back with accounts that would pass muster at any Aboriginal campfire. I mean, any Aboriginal elder would know exactly where they're going and what they're seeing because they see the same thing and they go to the same places. Now, what this suggests to me as a scientist is that there are two possibilities here. One is that all human beings everywhere share a basic psychic unity, as some psychologists and anthropologists have suggested, which means that we're all set up psychologically on the same basic program, despite our cultural differences. The other possibility is that what we're tapping into is an imaginal realm, which is clearly separate from the person who's perceiving it. In other words, this is not imaginary. This is a real alternate reality which exists right alongside the one that we're in right now. It's the realm of things which are not seen, the realm of things which are invisible. And, the trick lies in learning how to see it. And this is where shamans really shine because this is their main work.
You have to prove. Now, we've had quite 2 times in the chat, Hank, so I want to put this to you.
Okay.
As you're talking of you've been talking also of the kahunas and the spiritual principles or beliefs coming from that origin. Do you feel or have you found, is there a tie-in between that and Lemuria?
Lemuria. I asked Makua about Lemuria.
You did, okay.
He would smile, because he had this vast knowledge of the past, which was absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And so the way in which I approached him about this was, I said, Makua, there are legends about a diminutive race of people who lived here in the islands before those people who became Polynesians got here. And Makua agreed. He'd nodded his shaggy head and he said, yeah, those were the Mu. I said, the Mu? He said, yeah, they're the people that were here before we came. And he said they were everywhere. They were in Indonesia, they were in Polynesia, they were in Micronesia. They were a diminutive race of people, and they were master stoneworkers, and they used to make fish ponds and temples and big stone monuments and so forth and so on. And I said, well, what happened to them? And he said, well, in Hawaii today, people call them the menehune, and they're kind of like fairies or pixies or leprechauns. But in fact, they were real people. And he said when the Polynesians came, nobody likes to admit this, but the Polynesians were cannibals. And he said nobody likes to live next door to the cannibals because you know what they're going to do. So the Mu decided to leave, and they left. And I said, well, where did they go? And he said, they went to Central America, where they became the Maya. Think about it. Diminutive people who make big stone monuments.
Yes.
Those are the Mu. Those are the Mu who came from Polynesia. And in fact, one of their great spirits is called Hunab Ku, Ku. And the great spirit here in Polynesia of the land, the sort of physical aspect of everything is called Ku. It's the same guy. So I suspect that Lemuria is a kind of mythic, legendary, kind of soul remembering of a culture that lived in what is today Polynesia. Polynesian people consider Polynesia to be a continent. It's just that most of it's underwater. But all of the islands of Polynesia are united by culture, by genetics, by language, by shared history, by ancestry. They're really a single great culture, although today they're Marquesans and Samoans and Tongans and New Zealand, Maori and Hawaiians and so forth and so on. They can all basically understand each other because they've been probably here for about 2,000 years, maybe 2,500 years, maybe a little more. But the degree of separation between these cultures is not so great. But Lemuria was this whole area as it was inhabited by the Mu, who were here before the Polynesians. Does that compute for you?
Yes, it does. And we're getting a thank you in the chat, which they've renamed. It's a Sacred Empowerment, the Sacred Space of Empowerment Room. Yes, so we're getting... Now, do you find, too, because most, indigenous cultures, there's a similarity to the ritual initiation beliefs, obviously we all come from that one source, but do you feel that there was that, let's say, one point where people spread out from?
Oh, this is a fascinating story. This is the story of human migrations.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that Makua knew more about than anybody I ever met in my life. On the last night of his life, he gave me a glimpse into the vast knowledge of the path that he possessed, in the oral tradition, I might add. He had begun to write down his genealogy on pads of paper for me. And he showed me these pads of paper, and I said, what is this? And he said, well, I've decided to write down my genealogy. And he said, I'm going to give it to you. This was the night before he died, amazingly. And I said, well, how many generations are there? And he looked at me with great satisfaction, and he said, 1,260. Now, if you measure out 1,260, roughly 20 years for a generation, it comes out to 25,200 years. That was the depth of his knowledge. And it was really the story of human migrations all over the world. Now, because of my work as an anthropologist, there have been these waves of migration that have come out of Africa over the last 2 million years. There was a big one around 1.8 million where the first primitive humans emerged, the first members of our genus, the genus Homo, and spread out over much of the tropical parts of Africa and Asia. There was another great migration that came out around 700,000 years ago, which involved the form known as Homo erectus. But one of the really interesting migrations came out of Africa about 150,000 years ago. All of us, no matter what we look like today, Asians, Africans, Europeans, Polynesians, Inuits, Native Americans, we are all descended from that migration that came out. And that came out of Africa about 100,000 into the Middle East, and there it was stopped for about 50,000 years because Europe was already occupied by the Neanderthals, and there were various other archaic forms of Homo, archaic forms of Homo sapiens, really, that lived in Eurasia as well and Southeast Asia. And then about 50,000 years ago, we began to expand once again. And we expanded into Europe by 45,000 years ago, into China by about 45,000, 50,000, into Australia by about 45,000, 50,000 years ago. And from that migration, every single race on the planet is descended today, which means, and I know that some people find this problematic, it means that no matter what we look like today, under the skin, we are all Africans, and we're all very closely related genetically.
Wow. That's what I guess it is interesting. And that's where, I guess they say Africa, the motherland. So we all came from that place, and that you say migrated out into various, I guess different paths, basically.
Well, a lot of your listeners are probably aware of these little Venus figurines, like the Venus of Willendorf. If I say the words Venus of Willendorf, does that bring up an image in your mind?
Yes, it does, actually. Yeah.
She's got little tubby female form with big breasts and hips.
Yeah.
And she's got a little round head. Well, if you look at her, all right, that's an image that came from Europe. It was carved about 28,000 years ago, and it represents a pregnant woman. All right, she has no facial features. She has no feet. The whole emphasis is on female fertility. But if you look at her, she's got an afro, and her physiognomy, her anatomy, is reminiscent of the Bushmen from southern Africa. These were African people who'd come into Europe 28, 29, 30,000 years ago. And which means that all of those features that we think of as racially European or white or Anglo, they've really only developed in the last 15 to 20,000 years. It means that before 20,000 years ago, we all had dark-skinned, woolly-haired African ancestors. And I know that this is problematic for some people, but in fact it's true. And science has got really hard data on this. I find that absolutely fascinating, don't you?
I do. Well, I find, in a way, it makes sense if there has to be an origin point or a causal point. There has to be a point of something, even if there's another point beyond that and another point beyond that. But I find, it is it is fascinating that we all come from that.
I used to teach a class called Magic, Witchcraft, and Religion at the college and university level. It was a huge seller. It was always, people sitting on the floor. It was over enrolled always. And I used to teach a 2-week section on the paleo history of religion. And I used to trace the beginnings of spiritual awareness through burials, through rock art and cave art all over the world. And then in the end, we would sort of interpret it all through the eyes of the Bushmen of South Africa, because they were the last, really, they and the Aboriginal people of Australia were the last, practicing rock artists. So when we look at rock art through their eyes and through their stories, we suddenly understand what it means. And once you understand what it means in Australia or Africa, you can interpret rock art anywhere in the world, because they were all using the same basic symbols and the same basic visual alphabet, if I could put it that way, to express what they were trying to show. And the work of people like David Lewis Williams, who's a cognitive archaeologist from South Africa, or Jean Clot from France, who is one of France's big paleoanthropologists, they've shown unequivocally that the rock art was really produced by shamans, and most of it is depicting the shamans' visionary adventures in this alternate reality. They're on the one hand sort of teaching aids, probably for initiates, since you brought up the word initiation. This was probably part of the initiation ritual, but it's also possible that they were using these images as doorways to go into the alternate reality, to go into the other world. So, for example, if you wanted to do hunting magic and get permission from the spirit of woolly mammoth to kill them, well, what you got to do is you got to bring yourself into alignment with the soul of woolly mammoth, with the spirit of woolly mammoth, and get its permission. So you've got a big woolly mammoth on the cave ceiling. You lie down on your back, you eat a little magic mushrooms, and zoom, you go right through that doorway into connection with that spirit and make magic, and then the hunt will be successful. I mean, this may be a lot of what this cave and rock art was all about. Creating.
When you see a lot of that in New Mexico, and there are these dimensional doorways.
Scads, and in California as well.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a huge military reservation in a place called China Lake, which most people can't get to, which is probably a good thing, because once these rock art sites become known, people desecrate them. People shoot holes in them with rifles.
Yeah.
They cut them off to try to sell them in rock shops. There have been instances where Christian fundamentalists have gone and painted them over because they're the devil's work. Extraordinarily ignorant approaches to something really miraculous. Anyway,
I was just going to say, some friends of mine have been custodial property that there is some dimensional doorways there. We have seen other dimensional Native Americans there. It's near Temecula, Murrieta, that area. I don't know if you know that there's some.
I know that area very well.
You do? Okay. There's
UC San Diego.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's some doorways there, and their son at one point thought I was nuts because I was describing these two Native American elders I had been seeing, until this older gentleman came, like a handyman, to repair their refrigerator, and said, "Hey, you seen the Indians?" And he's like, "What?" And he described the same ones. He said, "I haven't seen them, but our friend has." But yeah, you can tap into those worlds. Now, Hank, we have a couple other questions.
Okay.
One was we got two. I don't know which to go with first. The Mayans. Now, you said perhaps from the Mu, Lemuria, Mu, to Maya in the South America. What's your feeling?
Actually. Yeah.
In Mexico now,
Mexico,
and where would
Guatemala.
you? Yeah. In Guatemala, where the question from Debbie was, where are they now?
Well, you have the lowland Maya who live in Guatemala and primarily in the Yucatan area of Mexico today. I mean, the Maya are still very much with us. They just don't make big stone monuments anymore. But interestingly, when I went down there as part of a conference 10 years ago, I encountered a Mayan elder named Hunbat's Men. Many of you may have met him in Mexico. Hunbat's Men.
Yes.
And I asked him about the mu, and he had no knowledge of that. He had no knowledge of that. So it may be that this is knowledge which has largely been lost in the Maya becoming who and what they've become in the last 2,000-3,000 years. I don't know. I really can't answer that question. But Makua was very much aware of it. The Hawaiian kahuna was very much aware of it.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. And also, Hank, if you can talk a little more back into the mic, the people are having trouble here.
Sure, I will.
That's the thing. It seems like there's bits of the information, and perhaps even someone like you is a weaver to bring it more together. It seems like some of the information is, fragmented or fell out, and then it's picked up in another, through another person or another group. Maybe some of your gift is weaving this for people.
Yes,
just a
indeed.
thought.
In fact, many of your listeners have heard of Sandra Ingerman. I'm sure you have as well.
Yes, I have, yeah.
Sandy Ingerman is a really superb shamanic teacher. I've known her for, oh my goodness, almost 30 years. And we've co-authored a book together, which will be out next year, called The Path of Direct Revelation. And it's going to be really upgrading all of the stuff that we're talking about and weaving it together into a form which is meaningful to us as Western people today.
Wow.
It's going to be a really great book.
Yeah, so needed.
It's going to have a chapter on the transformational community, a chapter on children, a chapter on how you work with the death experience, on how you work with the shamanic experience, the visionary experience. And we've gotten all sorts of people to contribute. Alberta Violdo has contributed. Tom Cowan, Proudfoot Edgar, a woman in California.
Oh yeah, Proudfoot. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We've got a number of shamanic practitioners to contribute to it, and I think it's going to be really kind of a unique piece. We'll talk about that next year when it comes out.
When it comes out, you have any time you want to come back, any time. Now, also, Hank, any thoughts about the aspect of us with the star seed connection or hybrid? Any feeling or thought of the dimensional aspect?
People are
and somebody lit in the chat is saying we need the book now.
Well,
don't
believe it or not, I've got a manuscript on my computer, which is about my conversations with the kahuna, and I've got some extraordinary stories to tell, and I'll give you one. Okay. In talking with Makua about this more than 10 years ago, he was interested in what I was doing in the field of human evolution. And then after I told him my story, from my perspective as a scientist, he kind of poured himself a margarita. The chief was very fond of margaritas. He was a chief. And he told me this extraordinary story. He said, well, we understand that humanity actually came from the stars. Yeah. He said, we didn't come here in spaceships. We didn't come here as aliens. We came here as souls. We came here as seeds of light. And it was a migration, just like the great migrations in the voyaging canoes in Polynesia in the last 2,000 years. It was a migration of souls from the stars. He said humanity originally came out of another dimension and across the universe, and we came in ships of light, in canoes made of light, which means they were made of energy. And we were accompanied by guardians, high guardians who knew the purpose of our destiny as souls. And we were brought here to this water planet because there were beings, primitive beings, that were ready to receive us.
Yeah.
Now, this was a long story that went on over several years, so I'll just jump in and out of it because he did that as well. He said, when you get back to 18.5 million years ago, that's where you'll find me. So my scientist goes to work on this, and he's watching me as I'm thinking about this. 18.5 million years ago was a time called the early Miocene period, and the animals and plants of that period were very different from those of today. You wouldn't recognize them, but they were the ancestors of those of today. And in Africa at that time, there was a spread of early anthropoid apes that we call the Dryopithecines. And, they took many different forms over the next 25 million years. But the fact is that about 18, 19 million years, about 6 million years ago, perhaps, one of those early resurrection, and a new evolutionary story occurred, and that's ours. That's the human line, the lineage of the family Hominidae. So you could, in a way, trace our lineage back to 18.5 million years ago to this spread of early anthropoid apes. Now, I thought to myself, Maku doesn't know anything about paleontology. How could he know this?
Yeah, exactly.
So in response to this, I asked him a question. I said, what happened to the spiritual guardians? And he said, some of them embodied too, so that they would be here when we were ready to receive the knowledge of our purpose and our destiny. The spiritual guardians embodying too. So I start going down the lists of animals that I know about from that range of time, looking for a highly evolved being. And suddenly I got it. The first modern cetaceans appear at the same time, the whales and the dolphins. The whales and the dolphins are the guardians who came with us.
Wow, I got goosebumps. Hank, oh my God, wow.
They're the ones who came with us across the universe, and they embodied. Now, you've got primitive whales and dolphins that go back to 50 million years ago. You've also got primitive primates that go back to 50 million years ago. But the first modern whales and dolphins appeared about 18 million, and the first anthropoid apes appeared about the same time. Now, this may not hook into a lot of our mythic stories of star people, but in fact, it's a beautiful example of bringing science and spirituality together and achieving a kind of convergence. And so I told him what I knew, and he laughed, and he said, you're right on track. And so I couldn't resist asking him. I said, have the whales and the dolphins given us this knowledge yet? And he said they have. And so their time here is up, and most of them are going to leave.
And that's
and I said,
happening.
where are they going to go? And he said, wherever they want. Because we're not talking about leaving in physical form. We're leaving as souls. As souls. And they can go anywhere they want. I mean, the universes are enormous when you think about it. There are over a trillion planets like Earth in our own galaxy. But,
so just going up dimensional.
So I said, well, what was the knowledge that they gave us? And he smiled. And he got this kind of sad look on his face. And he said, the knowledge that they gave us was that our purpose and our destiny is twofold. First of all, we're to enjoy ourselves. We're to grow and increase and become more than we were in the beauty of this wonderful planet. And secondly, we're to remember our divine origins through the experience of love for one another. And I thought that was just so incredibly beautiful. We're basically here to enjoy ourselves. And secondly, we're here to remember where we came from, to remember the fact that our nature is sacred, and we can only achieve that through the experience of love for one another. And that's what it's all about. Isn't that beautiful?
It is amazing. Oh, everybody's responding. Tammy is saying, this is awesome. This is so awesome.
You have any idea how pleasurable it is for me to be able to sit and share this stuff with you, and have all these people out there getting it, because you have an incredibly important position here in this dynamic, because you're creating like Grand Central Station for hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of people to get the word and to step up to the next stage in their own lives as well. And that's what it's all about. That's what we're here to do.
And I love that you say that step up. I think that's so helping people, Hank, because that there has been almost this regressive pull of, maybe I should just retreat or go back, or, can I do this? I also feel that everything that you've shared has been so, and continue to share, amazing. But the confirmation that you say you feel a confirmation and hopeful because also of the use of technology. That in a sense this is a sign,
Oh, yeah. Well, technology is a tool. And, I might put it this way as well. Shamanic journey work is also a tool. It's a kind of sacred technology, a technology of transcendence that was pioneered by the shamans of the Stone Age people. And the method still works today. It's amazing. I mean, this is what we do in our workshops, is we train people to really open up that channel and fine-tune it so that they can be drawn into connection with their own inner sources of wisdom and power. Because it's in this way that each person becomes their own teacher. They become their own guru.
Guru, this is the age of the Messiah you're waiting for is yourself. Your message,
right.
your own message.
That's
and those
right.
again that are listening, we've been talking with Hank Wesselman. You can reach him at sharedwisdom.com. I put it in the chat just for people that are, not able to see me writing. I write a little bit of information or repeat what you're saying, write it in the chat as well as the website. Because that's what's needed right now are the steps or the how-to. People need those places to go to get this information and get that support. Now, one thing I want to touch on too, Hank, because you mentioned this, you said something about the converging, and I keep hearing this, and my guides keep speaking of this converging flow, that we're, all part of this converging flow. And then you said earlier that this is the converging. You share anything on that?
Well, I think we're all being drawn together. There is a plan, and Makua used to call it the ancestral grand plan. And this was a plan that was set into motion by the ancestors thousands of years ago. And in a sense, they lived so that we who are alive today could accomplish this. And whether we accomplish it or not depends on many things. I mean, it's all about choice, isn't it? If we miss the chance this time around, it'll come up again another 2,000 years from now. But, if we do step up and we do start to create this new world built on a new foundation, things are going to change, and they're going to change very much for the better. I don't think it's business as usual anymore. Without offending anybody, 6 or 7 years ago, before we invaded Iraq, Jill and I were sitting and having margaritas with the chief. And, I said to him, Makua, what are we going to do about this administration in Washington? I mean, they're just, these are dark people. What are we going to do about this? And he said, and he looked very thoughtful, and he said, well, brace yourself, because George Bush has to be reelected in 2004. And so I said, what? And I stomped around in the negative polarity for a while. And, of course, he wouldn't go there. He would laugh, and he'd watch me, and then he'd reach down and haul me back out again. He said, no, George Bush needs to be reelected, because otherwise we'll have to repeat. You see, Obama is now president because of George Bush.
Yeah. Do you think it had to go to that? So it had to go in such that negative polarity to get a certain number, a tipping point of waking up. Is that part of what I'm hearing you say? Without going political, we didn't learn the lesson with Vietnam, did we? Okay.
So we've had to repeat.
Yeah.
And now we've repeated it once again. And the question now is, having been brought to this degree of cultural, financial, and social dissolution, which is what's happening, everything's unraveling, are we going to go back to business as usual, or are we going to learn the lesson this time? That's always what it's about.
Right. But now we're tied to the tail. I keep saying this is like when you go to those Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you always have, not always, but many of us have those in-laws that you go, oh, God, there they are again, in the back room or whatever. So we are part of the collective. So those of us, the way showers, the light beings, the ones that are living more consciously, how can we affect this change? Because in a sense, the repeating, many of us would not have repeated, whether it was Vietnam or did not want to definitely do. I definitely didn't want the Iraq, Iran. So any type of insight or sage advice for us that
all the wisdom keepers all say that we have to become the change that we want to see in the world. Each one of us has to do that individually. So we start with ourselves, and we love all that we see with humility. We live all that we feel with respect, and we know what we possess with discipline. So humility, respect, and discipline is our path. I mean, this is. So
you're saying as we're doing that more and more individually, we are affecting the consciousness.
Oh, there's this wonderful book that came out in 2000. You probably remember it. It was published by Paul Ray and Sherry Ruth Anderson. It was called The Cultural Creatives. At that time, they revealed that the transformational community in the United States alone came to between 50 and 70 million people, with another 90 to 100 million in Europe. Now, those are not small numbers. and that was
Right.
9 years ago. So, and this is where I find hope for the future, because, in fact, although we may not know it, we are part of an enormous community. We are traveling in the company of an enormous number of allies. This is very reassuring to me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
that's
the media,
true.
the media is a problem because they tend to focus in on the murder and mayhem stories, don't they? And so
Yes.
we're led to believe in the newspapers and the nightly news anchors on television and so forth, and all the talk shows and CNN. We're led to believe that things are terrible, that political mendacity and financial corruption and murder and mayhem is out of control. One of the things we have to remember is that all of that negative stuff is being generated by only 2% of the world's population. 98%,
oh my gosh. Oh.
98% of the world's population is not involved in murder and mayhem.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And the media has generated this dark shape, and Hollywood has followed suit. There's no question that the big money in Hollywood is to be made by appealing to the dark side of the human psyche.
Mhm.
I think there's no
Keeps
question.
us in fear. Yeah.
Well,
Gary is saying in the chat, it keeps you in fear if you have too much of that.
Oh yeah. Well, we live in a culture which is dominated primarily by fire clan people in a shamanic sense. There are different clans. There are water clan and earth clan and stone clan and nature clan and air clan people. Fire clan people in the negative polarity are dangerous because in the negative polarity, fire clan people become a war culture. And violence becomes a highly marketable commodity because it stimulates the culture as a whole. If you look at the Second World War and what it produced in terms of technology, it is unbelievable. That's typical fire clan. If you look at the way the descendants of the Celtic people of Europe, all those Celtic tribal people of Gaul and Britain and Germany, those were Teutons, of course, and Scandinavia, they were different, but they were all the same kind of people, all fire clan.
Yeah.
And we have literally overrun the planet, and in 100 years we went from horse and buggies to automobiles, and then in another 100 years, another 50 years, we landed somebody on the moon. That's all fire clan. In the positive polarity, we're doers, we're innovators, we're inventors.
Inspires, initiators, yeah.
Right. But unfortunately, they've been in the negative polarity, and things are sort of gone out of control. And I wonder, how long people are really going to put up with that now.
Yeah, well, I think, like you said,
it's a hard call.
Yeah, we're, like you said before, we're in that quickening. We are in that shift. And I love what you said. If we, that respect, that humility, respect, and discipline. If we're doing that more, and stepping up, I think that's so important. What you said, Hank. We got to more we're stepping up, stepping into this. That's going to be integral to this, the change point.
The indigenous people who you've studied with.
2 minutes, I just see, Hank. We could be on for. We should have 2 hours. Well, I have to have you back. I have to have you back at some point. Now we've got 1 minute.
We'll do it.
I do want to say, just in the last little bit, those that are listening, we've been talking with Hank Wesselman, which you can reach him through sharedwisdom.com. And Hank, do you have any, just briefly, I know people can go to the website, but any, I think in March and April, are you at Esalen?
I'll be at Esalen Institute in April. In March, I will be offering a workshop here on the Big Island. If anybody wants to come to Hawaii, you'll find it on our schedule. Also at Brighton Bush Hot Springs in Oregon.
Okay, and when is the one in Maui? When is the one in Hawaii?
In Hawaii. It'll be, I think, from March 7th to the 13th. So it's coming up.
Okay, great.
It's coming up. But I'll be at Esalen again in June, and at the Crossings in Austin in May, at Omega in late June as well. So I get around.
Yes, you do. And we're glad that you do, and we're glad that you could stop by and visit with us. We're really appreciative of your time, your energy, and your insight.
Well, blessings on you and everything you do as well.
Blessings and light. And listeners, thank you so much. Listeners, participants, thank you so much for joining in this point of consciousness in the converging flow. We've been speaking with Hank Wesselman, which you can reach at sharedwisdom.com. Definitely have him back. Got a lot. Listen to the archives again. A lot of great information here. And remember, you are that which you seek. You are the message, the Messiah, and you come here to share your love, light, your wisdom, and get that support to, as Hank said, step up. It's so important right now that we step into this. This is the call. Are you answering the call? More importantly, are you listening? Answer that call. All right, until next time, keep awake. Lots of love and light. Shine light, shooting insight, and light.